Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I am your host, Lamont Gates, bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest felt an unimaginable love during her near-death experience that defied any earthly version of the emotion. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Bianca Rosales. Bianca, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you so much, Lamont. I'm really excited to be here. Super excited for this conversation.
Glad to have you on. Indeed, likewise. Now, Bianca, before I get into your near-death experience account, I know it's a very serious story with a serious subject matter. I want to first get some information about your previous religious or spiritual belief systems. Before you had your near-death experience, was there something you practiced or believed in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Hispanic culture. I grew up Cuban, and so we practice Catholicism, and we also practice a close practice called Santeria. So I did have a deep spiritual belief that, that we were guided and protected not only by God, but by different angels and our ancestors. And I just knew or felt at the time that they were there to guide us. But some of the religious trauma that I experienced during that time growing up was that if we didn't listen to them, then bad things would happen. We would get punished. And so it was this back and forth of like, I know they love me, but I can't mess up. I'm walking on eggshells because then things are going to go wrong. So my grandmother was a deep, um, a deep believer of the Catholic faith, and she revered certain saints. And so times in our lives, like let's say, for example, when we had a health crisis happening at the house, we would call for Saint Lazarus, and we would pray, and we would go and do the laying of hands, and then we would turn over and then work with the ancestors in the practice of Santeria, to help facilitate the healing process even further. So those were the practices and the beliefs that I had prior to my NDE.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had a synergetic religious thing going. You had Catholicism and you had, like you said, the Santeria going, which sounded almost fear-based at a time for you, but you certainly had a concept of the afterlife.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not only that, I also had a concept of reincarnation. I had the concept that each of us came here with a specific life path and purpose of destiny, and that we were supposed to fulfill that destiny while we were alive. And so when we didn't, then we would have to try again in the next lifetime. So that was another set of beliefs that I grew up believing.
Wow, so you had a very layered, deeper spiritual belief system than just Catholicism and Santeria, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, with that said, why don't we go into what it was that actually triggered your near-death experience? As I said at the top of the show, I know this is a very serious subject matter. Please take your time in explaining it and let us know what it was that actually caused your NDE to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. So it has taken me a long time through lots of healing to get to the point where I can actually speak about this. But I grew up in a very dysfunctional home that was filled with events that were traumatic. It was very difficult for me as a teenager not being able to have the support in the household to be able to process certain emotions and certain abuse that was going on. And so that was just met that was just met with years and years and years of my emotional pain not being able to be processed. And so I was basically pushing that down. Um, and by the time I turned 18, I was isolated. I was completely alone. I felt, and it was constantly repeated, that I was a problem and that I need and in my mind I felt that the best way that the world would be better off without me. And so I made the decision in the deepest, darkest moment, I made the decision to attempt against my own life. And in because I also had the beliefs that I had, I even almost did it like in a very ritualistic sense. Now that I remember, like grabbed the I I grabbed the things I needed, and then I like sat down on my grandmother's rocking chair outside, and I drew a cross on the ground below me because I wanted to be accepted into heaven, right? I wanted God to accept me, because I just no longer wanted to be on earth. And I knew that attempting against my own life would possibly make him angry, her, whatever, right? And so I drank it was a potion, and I overdosed. And the first initial thing that happened was that as the as the drugs were going into my system, I started to feel this tingling sensation in my body. And then I started to feel like my body got extremely heavy. And in that moment, I could just remember feeling like it almost felt like I was like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I felt so guilty, like I shouldn't have done this. And then all of a sudden I feel or see a white light. And I felt this overwhelming sense of love, and that was it. Boom, I was blasted right back into my body. And when I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital, and I opened my eyes and I see the bright light, but I see the bright light of the medical equipment that was in the hospital. And I remember in that specific moment when I woke up, I'm like, what? And I could feel my body feel so heavy, so heavy. And I was screaming like, why? Like, why am I not be like, why am I still here? Why did I come back? I was so confused. So again, I came back with amnesia. And the next couple of days proceeded with me kind of reintegrating my spirit was reintegrating back into my body. And as I was in the psych unit, recovering, I remember being, it was so crazy because I think of this now, but I was in a room full of people that everybody would consider to be crazy. Like I was in there with people who did things that is the unimaginable. And I was there, I felt like I was the only normal person. And I'm like, I don't belong here, but at the same time, it's just so peaceful here. It's so peaceful. Like I had this overwhelming sense of peace. And there was a garden that we were allowed to step outside to. And it was like during noon or lunchtime, we were allowed to step out of the unit and go outside into the garden. And that day I decided to go by myself. And I remember sitting in the garden and looking at it was like this beautiful red flower. And I don't remember what it was, but it was a beautiful red flower. And as I'm looking at it, I could hear a voice saying, this is the peace that you deserve. And this is the peace that you can have in every moment. And at first, it caught me by surprise because I had not heard a voice like that before. And I'm like, okay, right? So I'm like, that actually felt really, really good. And so then my thoughts started changing to why wasn't I allowed to leave? Like why changed direction. The why wasn't why am I still here versus why am I still here? Why do I still exist right now? Why is this my reality in this moment? And that just catapulted me into a journey of self-discovery. And I just started, decision after decision. It was always prompted or motivated by this desire to discover the real reason why I was truly here. And in that process, I encountered lots of inner demons and shadow work and all of these different things that I needed to get past in order to get to this point where I was reminded that the reason why I forgot was the same reason why when we take our first breath as a baby, as a newborn child, we forget because the whole entire purpose of the journey is to remember who you are. And if you know that from the very beginning, then it kind of takes away from the purpose, right? So it seems as though my soul left, and I say left, but I guess entered into the afterlife and then remembered in the afterlife the reason why I was here and said, you know what? I want to go back still not remembering because I there is a beauty in the process of remembering and not knowing the mystery in itself was the beautiful part of the process. And so then I ended up realizing, okay, that's the reason why I don't remember my full NDE. I wasn't supposed to. Because if I knew, I wouldn't have been so motivated to discover why I was still here, why I was able to open up, why I was able to come back into this density of my body and continue to live life as a human being.
Yes, that is a very, very captivating account there. If you would, I would like to go backwards and ask a few follow-up questions. Now, you start off talking about the trauma in your family. As a matter of fact, at the top of the show, we talked about religion. Coincidentally, you talked about how religious your family was, from Catholicism to Santeria, but then there was also trauma there, right? That weighed on you. So it was kind of like polar opposites, right? There's the
Oh
religion,
yeah.
but then there's the trauma, which eventually caused you to commit, as you stated, this ritualistic suicide. And there you were catapulted right into this bright light. Now, when you were in this light, it sounds like you were there very briefly. Did you get a sense of time at all?
No, not at all. It seemed as though I was the moment that my eyes closed, it seemed like it was like a tunnel and the light was just this bright. It wasn't a circle, but it had no shape. It was just so bright and it just kept getting bigger and bigger as if I was getting closer and closer. And it just started to just engulf my whole entire being. And then boom, I came back. That's what I remember.
And while you were there in this light, you described an emotion, extreme emotion of love. How could you compare that feeling of love where you are there versus any kind of love that you've ever felt here?
It's in it's it is so incomparable. Like I have actually thought about this multiple times. Like that love that I felt was so overwhelming that I felt like the human being is not able to even mentally even there's no words to describe how overwhelming this love was. It was like the love that encapsulated everything and everything. It was literally a love that I would say like the love that I felt for my partner, for my companions, for my friends, for my pets times infinity. It was that big of a it was big and massive and it was so immersive and it was so embracing and nurturing. Like it was a love like I've never ever experienced before, even after I've returned. It's just like it's not a love that I can put in words. It's a love that I know that is creation itself. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's just so it's unfathomable to the human mind, the layers, the I can't even describe it. It was just massive.
Yeah, many near-death experiencers talk about how the experience itself is extremely ineffable, very difficult to describe, but I can tell from the energy that you're emitting right now that it must have been something beyond gigantic. You know, that's not even a word to describe it. You say you woke up then in this hospital, and there were you surrounded by family members? Obviously, the doctors and the nurse staff was there. Did you have family members there with you?
I had my mother. She was sitting in the she was sitting across of me when I woke up and I was looking up and they were trying to hold me down because I started freaking out. I was like, what am I doing here? What am I doing? And I look over and I see my mother across from me, and she looked upset, like she looked mad at me, like, how dare I do this, right? So that was the only family member that I saw there at the time in the hospital, or that I could remember, because even that was still a blur.
At any given time, did you tell your mother or anyone what you had just experienced?
No, no. I actually never told any of my family members any of my experience, any part of it.
And was there a particular reason for that?
It was more as I would say that the environment and the atmosphere as to when I returned home wasn't welcoming to have that type of conversation. There was a lot of guilting and shaming for what I had done. And I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe to be able to express my experience. So I kind of just relived the experience over and over by myself, on my own, in my head.
Now, you stated that you felt that your experience actually dragged on much longer than just you coming into the light and coming back into your physical body, but it's been very, very difficult for you to recall that. In your explaining of the account, though, you've worked out a theory that it was explained to you that you had a purpose here. And with that said, many near death experiencers talk about after effects, coming back from a near death experience. A lot of them talk about having higher empathy levels, lacking the fear of death, finding more purpose and meaning in their life, having bouts of precognition, premonitions, etc. Did you come back with anything remotely close to these?
I would say all of that, actually. Little by little, it would be one or the other. It would be something that would open up as I would continue to experience. I think the first thing that I came back with is more of an open mind and an open heart. That was for sure. And then as time passed and as moments passed and as I continued to experience life, then I would continuously start to open up to I like I would open up different psychic abilities, being able to hear the guidance. I was able to understand why certain things was happening in the moment, or in hindsight I could reflect back as to what it was happening. I definitely no longer fear death. It wasn't something where, and I feared it before for sure. It was like, I don't know where we go, with Catholicism, it was, yeah, it's like you're going to hell if you do this, right? So, yeah, I did fear death before, but after it was like, I just knew that I just don't disappear. Like, I knew that my spirit that lived within me was going to is going to live on forever, and I continue to feel that. And definitely opened up to more visions. I definitely my spiritual gifts began to develop more and more. And there were definitely times too where it was because I was so open and I was becoming very self-aware, that certain lessons and certain karmic lessons and individuals, people, places, and things that were coming through to help me release the karma that was needed in order to evolve and continue to expand. Um, they were, for me personally, more visceral. Like, I was paying more attention. I was no longer asleep. Does that make sense? Like, I was no longer in like this like dream state. I was wide awake, right? Everything was more visceral. I could feel it in my body. I could feel the guidance in my body. I could see what was happening. I could discern the difference between this and that. So yeah, definitely opened me up so much when I came back.
And I want to go back because obviously this was a suicide attempt. Many near-death experiencers who attempt suicide, very often they talk about going into what they describe as a hellish loop, right? They go into this dark place and the dread, the fear, the anguish, the depression runs even deeper on that side before they come back. But you had a suicide attempt but went right into the light. So that tells us that not every suicide attempt is the same when we talk about a near death experience, right? So it's a case by case basis. And I think for the most part, whether you have a hellish loop or go into a bright, loving light, you still ultimately come back learning a lesson, which I think is what you actually came back with yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the biggest lesson for me was that, you know, there is purpose to this life. There's no reason to give up when it gets hard or when it seems hard, because at the end of the day, what seems hard is actually the lesson itself. And it, it was the fact that there was a destiny that I said, that I promised, and that I committed to, that my soul, my spirit committed to, that I was going to fulfill. And in that commitment, that was my purpose, to fulfill that. And that was the lesson, that I just had to go all the way through and have fun doing it. Because only in that, in the joy, was not I was not going to experience or go back to that place where I was when I first attempted.
And again, talking about your suicide attempt and your self concept at the time prior to having the near death experience, what is your self concept now? How do you see yourself now? Do you love yourself more or do you still struggle?
No, I absolutely love myself. I love myself for sure. I will say this. I am much more compassionate with myself. Um, I'm less judgmental. And I'm also very aware that I won't get to this point of being healed and being perfect, because that was one thing that was drilled within me. You have to be perfect. There's no such thing. And just loving myself through my imperfections, through my flaws, um, and being compassionate with the process. When I think I've made a mistake or when I feel like I regretted a decision, it's only going to lead me either to another lesson or just to a deeper understanding to what that was, right? So I would say that my self concept now is just, I'm deeply grateful. I live in such deep gratitude for myself, for who I am. I trust myself now. I'm much more compassionate um, with myself, and because I'm this way with myself, it naturally reflects to every single person that I encounter, in every experience that I have. It's just reflected within my environment.
So it sounds like the fact that you're able to now truly love and have compassion on yourself, it causes a ripple effect in your relationships towards others and with others.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Very
As within,
fascinating.
so without. Absolutely.
Very fascinating indeed. Now, we started the conversation off with the religious question at the top of the show. And you said that you started out being Catholic with a practice of Santeria and other deeper esoteric spiritual beliefs. What does the concept and topic of religion look like now? Are you still Catholic? Do you still consider Santeria, or has all of that changed?
I've taken I've taken the wisdom from both practices. And I have studied other religions during my time as well. And what I have noticed is that they're all telling the same story. They're all giving basically the same set of recommendations and suggestions to live a healthy, happy, joyful life. And so for me, my religion is my spirituality. My religion is how I show up for myself, how I show up for others. And I've just been able to receive and be able to even apply the wisdom from all of the religions that I have studied and learn that, they're all saying the same thing. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
And I think you used the key word there, wisdom. That's
Mm.
exactly what you sound like you came back from this experience with a whole lot of wisdom towards yourself and wisdom that can be spread around so that everybody can get a bit of it and learn from you, who learned from the light.
Yes, and that's also another part of my life's mission. My purpose was to remember who I was and why I was here. My life's mission is to help others remember who they are and through my stories, through my experiences, through my truth.
Absolutely fascinating indeed. Well, Bianca, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us that incredible account.
Thank you so much, Lamont. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable and speaking to your audience.
Absolutely no problem at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Bianca Rosales.